back to you, but as you know, it's been busy. So many great connections and collaborations happening, lots going on. All right, so I see the YouTube is good to go. Thank you, Sophia. And our friends who were here earlier in the Zoom link are back, and we are live streaming on YouTube with thanks to Sophia and Almazar for supporting with all of our tech. Please do feel free to tweet out the do you want to put the YouTube address in the chat there, Sophie, if you don't mind? We will put this on the 9 account YouTube, but we're not using the same account right now, so we'll YouTube live it this way, and then we'll save it to our account later on. So do feel free to share. We just ask that you don't share the Zoom link itself. If people want to watch it from this point forward, we don't want to have people interrupting the Zoom meet. We would ask that they join from the YouTube live so that we're not distracting anybody and honoring the space. So I'm very happy to be here. So Sophia, thank you for putting that in the chat. Before we get started, I'm going to do our land acknowledgement from an advocacy standpoint. It's different from our organizational ones that we may use. I know that's not what all countries around the world do, but as organizer, working and living in the area where I live, I want to make sure that I do that. So just bear with me for a second. I'm hoping I can see everything well. So we would like to acknowledge that many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island and across the world have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories and lands upon which our advocacy and community leadership occur. We would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of these nations, as the struggles for Indigenous rights is deeply connected to all human rights work. When we recognize the systemic and social connections within our work, it is also essential we refuse to historicize these struggles, because doing so ignores the impact of colonial oppression which persists today. And in our advocacy efforts, we are committed to disrupting and dismantling the systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their lands and denied their rights to self-determination. This work is essential to human rights work across the world. And I know that that is about Indigenous rights and acknowledging the land and the spaces where we live and work and educate. But when I think of incredible humans and people who are really embodying this work in all they do, Morénike is someone who does come to mind. And I know that you're very humble in many ways, but I want to acknowledge that Morénike wears many hats or scarves, as it were, and has many roles, too numerous for me to try to encapsulate in something, you know, as we introduce Morénike. But I would like to ask Sophia if you wouldn't mind introducing Morénike formally from the bio that we have on our website. So if you want to refer back to it, it is there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely privileged to read this out, actually. Thank you, which is why I'm just like, ah! Like, I just had a wee practice read of it. I need to read it twice over for me to get it all correct. Right, okay, so forgive me if I pronounce anything incorrectly, and feel free to just correct me as well. Morénike Giwa Onaiwu, PhD, is an educator, writer, public speaker, parent and global advocate whose work focuses on meaningful community involvement and leadership, disability, racial and gender equity, dismantling stigma and inclusion empowerment, often drawing from personal background as a person of colour in a neurodiverse and serodifferent family, a late diagnosed adult on the autism spectrum, and relevant educational and professional experience. Morénike is a highly sought after presenter, consultant and subject matter expert. Use the excitement bit, right? Morénike founder and principal operator of Advocacy Without Borders, has been an invited speaker in the White House, at the United Nations headquarters, a keynote speaker and or presenter at numerous conferences, and provides diversity research and disability consulting to several organizations. Morénike, a humanities scholar at Rice University, has been published by Beacon Press and Palgrave Macmillan and will release a 2022 edited collection on neurodiversity in the Black community. Woo! With Jessica Knightley Publishing. I'll be reading that because I need it for my dissertation, but apart from that, it looks amazing. Amazing, and we're just so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sophia and Karen and everyone. So the very first thing that I want to say is there is something going on with my computer. So I'm trying really hard to use, this is my son's senior ring that he can't fit. So I'm staying with that and this to try not to move too much so that the audio won't cut in and out too badly. And I'll try to also talk a little slower than I usually do so that it will be clear. But I just really appreciate everyone being here. I'm just so happy about this summit. And I see some friends, Alex is here, and I see some people whose work I've admired for a long time. I see existential autists and Autistics Unmasked and Autistic Travelers, and a bunch of folks are all logged in here. And I'm just really happy that you all are able to join. And so I know you've had a long day and lots of, amazing presentations and, discussions and so forth. And so hopefully I can, not, can I adjust my audio? Sorry, Alex, I'll try. Hold on. It has been acting so weird today. So freaking annoying. Is this any better? Or is it pretty much the same? Okay, I'll try. Sorry, everyone. So kind of the same, yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'll try to just project my voice more then. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and I'm also gonna need to share sound. Alrighty, and so go back to the front. Hopefully everybody can see us. So this is, this is essentially, as you know, this is the Intersectional Infinity Summit. And so I'm really happy to be here with all of you. As I mentioned, I'm Morénike Giwa Onaiwu. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and they, them, there. And come on, computer. Right. And so I told Karen, it's funny. So initially, I think it's been several months. I know this summit has been planned for quite some time. And so when we talked about it some time ago, when Nine was working on it and everybody was kind of getting everything together and all of the themes and talked about so many different things, and we had a really good conversation. It was kind of hard to kind of get back to business and figure out what we wanted to talk about. And, I know that in terms of talking about neurodiverse education, students and family and ourselves and just society, that there's so many topics. And so, in thinking about a lot of things, I was really kind of struck the other day by a lot of dynamics of what happened at the Oscars. And so I just started thinking about, I said, I'm going to talk about how this aspect of things as a person of color, and talking about problems and mental health and just how all of these different things converge in our lives. And so I decided to call it 99 Problems. And so I'm going to be talking about mental health and people of color and issues related to that and resources and sharing some information about my own personal story and the context that I see, because it's important for us in our role as, whatever our role is, as educators, as allies, as members of the community, to be intersectional and to have an understanding and respect for these different matters, and to be able to address them in an informed way that's also culturally sensitive. So first, I want to give a couple disclaimers, is that I am here, I am affiliated with a number of organizations, as you all know, well, some of you might know, but I'm, involved with Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network, Foundation for Divergent Minds, the IEC, a number of other groups as well. I'm on the IACC, Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, but I'm here on my own behalf today, just to kind of speak about these issues overall. And I want to ask my presentations are very image heavy. And so if you need image descriptions afterward, I'll have a slide where I'll show the contact information for my part-time assistant, and we can email those out to you if you need them. I do apologize for not having them ahead of time, but I had to preserve spoons, so I had to make some choices. I also want to state that, again, if there's any issues with the audio, I do apologize. We do have the captions, and I'm looking at them now as I speak, and being that I have a Southern accent, they aren't exactly that accurate, but hopefully it will help, us maneuver if my audio is still not too wonderful. I like to start all of my presentations with what I call my 5 C's of accessibility. And that's an important thing to do, especially, when we're talking about neurodiversity. So my first C is for comfort, and I want everyone to be comfortable. So I am in my bedroom. This is my headboard. And I'm barefoot, and I've got my stimming stuff right here. And usually I'd have some snacks right here. I didn't get any. So at some point I'm going to try to get my husband's attention, discreetly, or maybe non-discreetly, to bring me a drink and a snack at some point. But I want you all to be comfortable as well, because that's the way that you'll take information in. This is our home for the next hour. And so I also want you to connect. So you see the hashtag for the summit that you can use. If you want to tag me, I guess I'm on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. Twitter is probably the only one I use somewhat consistently. I'm pretty sporadic with my social media use, but I'm at Morénike Giwa, which is more Nike, like the shoe, and go away. Or if there's any organizations of your own that you want to share, if there's any points or that, that's how we learn, is by connecting, communicating, and looking things up, and being active. I also want us to be considerate. So everybody here is different. We know that, the neurodivergence is a spectrum, and we know that neurodiversity overall is a reality of the world, of life. And so everyone doesn't communicate the same way or have the same knowledge base. And I just want us to kind of, be considerate and give one another grace before we make assumptions about things. And my last 2 C's are for challenge and commit. I'd like to challenge you. Some of you, it's been a really long day. I just want, if you could just kind of push through, give us a little bit more of your energy, so that together we can, facilitate this space and make it a learning space and interactive. And I want to challenge you that it doesn't matter if you have been involved in this for 1 year, 1 month, 10 years, 20 years, we all have something to learn, and we all have something to contribute as well. So I think that no matter what your role is, I hear some people say sometimes, well, I don't know what to do, I'm just a parent. I'm thinking, just a parent, that's great. First of all, it gives you more credibility, sadly, than it does someone else. But being a parent is a huge role. You have influence. You have people that you can talk with. You have people that you can educate. Or if you're an educator, if you're a student, if you're a self-advocate, there's someone that listens to you. There's someone that respects what you have to say, that you can touch, that you can try to bring along, for this ride. And I want to commit you to growing and changing. Nobody is perfect. Everyone's going to make mistakes. We're all going to screw up. Let's not cancel one another when things go wrong. Let's call each other in, and let's try to get this right together. So I'm going to be talking about the Oscars, which there was violence. We're going to be talking about disability, and we're talking about racial matters, gender, kind of a hodgepodge of things. And that's a lot of stuff. So that could be triggering. And so I ask that you, going back to my 5 C's, that you take the initiative to comfort yourself if you need to, as you need to. If it means you need to step away for a moment or whatever it is that you need to do. For me, envisioning things that are positive help. So for me, my happy place is the beach, water. I would live at the beach if I could. And so that's what I kind of do for myself, and when I need that. And I also, again, going back to being comfortable, I realize this is a digital space, a virtual space. And so my computer's acting weird. Like, for example, I'm a little anxious because I like to look at the chat and see how things are going. Because sometimes people will say, oh, great point. Or they'll be like, get on with it. Or they'll be like, you're too loud, or you're not loud enough. But I can't really tell what's going on right now. So again, in the new virtual world that we have, things aren't always what they seem, Hopefully most of you do have pants on, but whatever the case is, I'm just glad that you're here with me and with us in this setting. So the Oscars. Could have been and was, I've read so many things online, and I've read them from so many different perspectives. I've read them from the perspective of the autistic community, because as we know, Chris Rock has a nonverbal learning disorder, is essentially, a very similar diagnosis and has, presentation where a lot of people consider him to be part of the autistic family, whether or not he self-identifies. Will Smith and Jada Pinkett also have their own, have psychological disabilities and other things that they've shared about candidly in the public. All of these people are entertainers. They're all Black. I'm an Xennial, so in between Gen X and Millennial, like the oldest of the Millennials. And so I grew up with these people. I grew up with Everybody Hates Chris, and I grew up with Jada Pinkett, you know what I mean? The different, as an actress, and with Will Smith. And so all these people to me, it was an important, and it was, beneficial to see people who looked like me and looked like my family, and had shared experiences that I could relate to. And then, as I got older and as, when they started being a little more candid about disability, that was another area that I found was, where there was, connection as well. So for me to think in my lifetime that I have seen a Black president, I have seen a Black and Desi vice president, and now a Black man has written, produced, directed, and won an Oscar in my lifetime. Like, that's insane. I just, I got to die right now. Seriously, be all right. Because this is a representation I thought would never happen. This should have been a really joyous occasion, but it couldn't be for me because it was an occasion full of misogyny and full of ableism and full and cringy feeling that if, we all of us, being neurodivergent, there's already this kind of sense of, having to be this ambassador for the people, wanting to be yourself, wanting to be comfortable, wanting to be free, but at the same time, knowing that you're not, viewed or, evaluated the same way as others. And then there's the racial element on top of it. So there's part of me that's like, wow, that's not funny. I mean, alopecia, a diagnosis that I also have. This is a gorgeous wig. You know what I mean? I like Jada, I suddenly found my hair falling out in handfuls and clumps, and, went from long hair that I really enjoyed, loved stimming with and playing with, to basically none. I was, hence the scarf and, all the different things that I wear lately. In addition to that, I think about the fact that, okay, so this is a comedian, but certain things aren't funny. Some things aren't, I think people in the disability community were tired of being fodder for people's jokes. It gets old. And I don't understand why it's acceptable to make jokes at the expense of Black women or women, people assigned female at birth who are Black women of femmes like Jada. Nor do I think, so there's that part of things. But then there's the part of me that's like, wow, he hurt her feelings. Get him, punch him, like get your revenge. You know what I mean? Like, then there's a part of me like, wow, white folks are gonna think we're animals. You know what I mean? We can't even control ourselves. Somebody's insulting our, and there's just all of these different elements of the situation, and so many just complicated things in general when I think about all of the stuff that we're doing with neurodiversity education, with acceptance, with awareness, with our engagement with other people, and how all of these things, bleed into one another. And so I really wanted to share a little bit about, Jada's, and this may be reviewed for some people, but I just ask that you humor me. And again, I hope that the volume cooperates, but it's a 51, I think, second segment from Red Table Talk, which is Jada Pinkett Smith's show. And she's talking with her daughter Willow and her mother about wearing a scarf and about alopecia, about the early process of starting to lose her hair and kind of like how it impacted her. And then I'll kind of go on to some other things. So, all right, hoping the volume will work okay. Optimize the video clip. Okay.
I did not know at all what to expect from Amazon. Benefits from day one. The insurance at Amazon, copay, like most of the time I don't even have one. I called my dad. You're not gonna believe the benefits.
It was terrifying when it first started. I was in the shower one day and then just handfuls of hair just in my hands. And I was just like, oh my God, am I going bald?
I'm sorry, y'all, because I was looking at something, it shaded the screen. So I'm gonna go back a little bit, because to me that just looks really weird and it's hard to figure out what's going on. So yeah, give me a minute.
It was terrifying when it first started. You know, I was in the shower one day and then just handfuls of hair just in my hands. And I was just like, oh my God, am I going bald? It was one of those times in my life where I was literally shaking with fear. That's why I cut my hair.
Yeah.
And why I continue to cut it. The higher power takes so much from people. And by golly, if the higher power wants to take your hair, that's it. When I looked at it from that perspective, it really did settle me.
Yeah.
You know, so I admire Lola. Stop now. You cannot play. I said so. Lovely. All right. So while I respect the hell out of Jada, I'm not that altruistic. And I'm not like, oh, the higher power wants to take my hair, it's okay. I have a complicated relationship with disability. There's some aspects of my identity as a disabled non-binary woman that I absolutely love. There's things that make up who I am, that I fight for, that I, you know, am proud of. And there's certain things that make things difficult for me and certain things that I don't really know how I feel about them. And so there are just so many things, the rules, the terminology, just everything is so different for our community. It's so hard to be all of who you are and still be allowed to exist in your society and to be accepted. It's very challenging and it can be very triggering. And so thinking about all of that and how all of that was making me feel as I was reading the different posts and I was seeing the news clips and people were saying this one should be in jail or this is not a big deal or who cares or just all of the different things that I was seeing about it. And again, I'm thinking about this, you know, this really, you know, momentous, sentimental occasion, I'm sorry, that wasn't getting its due because of being overshadowed. And it just started making me think, oh, it says your screen sharing is paused. Are you freaking serious? All right, sorry, y'all. Doesn't need to be paused. All right. So I started thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer and, you know, her story and how she shared about how she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Those iconic words that she said at the 1964 Democratic National Convention when most of us weren't even born yet, you know, but, you know, I just want to talk a little bit about Fannie Lou Hamer because I want to talk about, like, when we look at a lot of things, one of the things that has made me so happy about this intersectionality, you know, Infinity Summit has been the range of voices that are represented, you know, voices that often we don't hear a lot from, that really kind of demonstrate the heterogeneity and kind of the beauty of our neurodivergent community. And so, you know, Fannie Lou Hamer isn't often someone people think about when they think about disability justice or disability rights. Because of the fact that she was, you know, primarily known for being involved in like voting rights and civil rights. She was a granddaughter of slaves. She grew herself and was a sharecropper. And she knew what she had been shot at and harassed and all types of things. And she acquired her disability because of violence, essentially. And so a quote that has always kind of stuck with me that she stated when people asked her some questions about the beatings that she encountered while trying to register to vote, she stated, "They beat me till my body was hard. They beat me till I couldn't bend my fingers or get up when they told me to. That's how I got the blood clot in my left eye. The sight's nearly gone now. My kidney was also injured from the blows that they gave me in the back." So by trying to exercise her rights in America that she was entitled to, she was harmed because, again, she was disposable. She was a Black person, she was a woman, she was from the South, she was poor. And then if you add disability to that as well, she was, you know, a subhuman. And there's so much of that. That's the reality for so many of us, and it should not be. And so that's why I want to spend some time talking about the issues of mental health and how they impact people of color, and some of the historical elements that we should reflect upon, so that we can give, have some compassion and have some context and understanding for the circumstances that we find ourselves in, or we find our children or our colleagues or our students in, why people might react certain ways, or why we might see some of the dynamics that we see. And the first thing I want to do is just kind of give some credit, give a little credit to B.B. Moore Campbell, who the late author, who did a lot of work sharing, in kind of like in this contemporary America, about the stigma of mental health in communities of color, most specifically her community, the Black community. Her daughter has bipolar disorder or condition, and often there are when you need to reach for help, there are limited resources. There's a lot of stigma. It's not universal in terms of like shared decision making or supported decision making, how family members can help you. And a lot of people would rather be anything else but disabled, or and one thing that B.B. Moore Campbell said was, stigma is one of the main reasons that people with mental health problems choose not to seek treatment or take their medicine. Many people of color, particularly those who are African American, feel stigma so much more keenly. In a race-conscious society, sometimes you don't want to be perceived as having yet another deficit. So it creates a sense of trauma, so, in and of itself, like, discrimination can cause trauma that can disable us. It can be disabling in and of itself. And then there's inequities that we face already in life that, from the, the air that we breathe in the areas where we live, or the type of paint or water that we're consuming, or so many different things. The food deserts in our communities, or what have you. There's so many things that impact and kind of layer upon one another that can impact our health, and particularly our mental health. And this goes back way far. This goes back before any of us ever were born. This goes back to, colonialism and chattel slavery. There was a land acknowledgement given a little earlier. And so, I, as someone whose parents, were raised under colonial rule, who lived, in West Africa, where, essentially the indigenous people's land were taken, and where they were, languages and customs were forced upon them, and I think about how devastating a lot of these things were. This was just everybody's reality. And, thinking about people like Harriet Tubman, who was a disabled woman, who would have, who had visions and so forth, and how she was revered for, and used her differences to aid in the Underground Railroad and getting people to freedom. But I also think about a lot of the accounts of the empires in Africa that are often not talked about, because our history doesn't start with slavery. We don't start under the whip, but when I think about, I see so much evidence for, kind of the beauty and the creativity in neurodivergence when I look at history. So I talked about, again, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Phyllis Wheatley, all of these individuals were disabled individuals, had disabilities in some way. Phyllis Wheatley Peters had a disability since she was a young girl, and actually died in her early 30s. And so I mentioned Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, from that slide and this slide earlier, also as individuals who have disabilities. And Sojourner Truth has the powerful Ain't I a Woman, poem, where she kind of really takes the concept of public intellectualism and feminism and turns it on its head. But this isn't something that's unique to people, who are of African or Black descent. We've seen some similar things happen to, our indigenous siblings as well, both here in the United States and in Canada and in other parts, other places as well, in terms of, treaties being broken, land being lost, illness, in terms of the residential schools, the death havens that people were forced into, and loss of culture, loss of land, loss of dignity. It's really shameful that many of the residential schools that people were forced into, as you can see here, and most people lost a lot of their custody, were, aside from the fact that they were basically petri dishes of infection, where the towels and the utensils were all close together, and they were, the beds were close together, and there was very little public health practice in terms of keeping people safe. Aside from that, those same places, I'm sorry, I meant to go back one, when some of these schools, what had formerly been, it's just very interesting when you look at, if you are into architecture at all, in a lot of places, there is no difference between the asylums of old and the residential schools, or the residential schools. A lot of times they moved out and took off one sign and put on another. So what had been, a Willowbrook type of place was supposed to be a home, a place to educate youth who were at best allowed to see their parents once a year, who were yelled at, who were loaned out to families to do, physical labor, or to care for their children without money, who were not allowed to speak their languages or practice their customs, and were grossly mistreated. And again, there's lots of discrimination, again, as we keep going. The separate, segregation, separate but equal, a lot of the discrimination, the sundown cities, that discriminated against people who were indigenous, signs that said things like no dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans allowed. There also were signs that said no Irish, no dogs, no Irish allowed too. They were, in many places. There were people who were treated badly for if their name seemed to be overtly, Czech or Jewish or what have you, to the point where a lot of people started to change their names so their children wouldn't face the discrimination. There's things like the Japanese internment camp, of which I discovered about 2 years ago that there was one just only a few miles away from, like maybe about 15 miles away from where my family lives. And it's just shocking. And how people were, were treated so terribly, discriminated against so horribly, for nothing but for the crime of the way that they looked in the country where they lived, where they were, paying taxes and paying bills and raising their children. And then there's the sanctioned. So there's societal sanctioned, reproductive justice, horrors as well, such as the No Mas Bebe campaign that was inflicted upon so many different women, where they would say that they had emotional instability or cognitive disability, or that they were homeless or indigent, or whatever they would do to sterilize these women and to take the custody of the children that they did have, and forced consent that occurred in so many places, which is not consent at all. Tuskegee is another one. Allow people to basically spread syphilis to, untreated syphilis to their spouses and children, over a length of period of time, and giving them a pittance only when over 40 years later it was caught. All of these things, I know that this is the past. But the past and the future and the present are all intertwined. And these historical traumas are things that impact us today. There is a lot of research that has been done in the descendants of Holocaust survivors of that transmitted trauma, because that's not something that people endure and it doesn't impact you, it changes you. And the same thing for some of these other things. That is not even to mention or to talk about the trauma that we face currently, not just the transmitted trauma that we have from the past, but the direct traumatic stressors that we're facing in the society that we live in, or the vicarious ones that we have because of things that are occurring in society that we're facing. Talked a little bit about the sanitariums. There were things such as there was a school for the blind. For blind youth that did not have electricity for a number of years of its existence. And so how were the instructors able to adequately care for the needs of the youth there? There were mental health facilities that were segregated by race, to where if there was a person of color admitted, they had to live in the outhouse. This was reality. Discrimination is a part of life. And as marginalized people, because all human beings have privileges and marginalizations, no one has only one or only the other. these are times when basically for no fault of our own, we aren't given the proper rights or encouragement or chances or opportunities that we deserve. And it doesn't have to be something that's overt. It can be subtle. It can be imagery, media, from the depiction of, African Americans as, violent, and oversexed in this, in this, ad here, or this one, or the mocking of, historical aspects of African culture in medication, in sterilizing 12 and 14-year-old young girls for the crime of having cognitive disability, and for the things that we see happening every day in the disability community, for the children of color who are misdiagnosed or who are inadequately diagnosed and who have out of school suspension at higher rates than other youth, or of our disabled youth who maybe are not of color, but by virtue of having a disability are marginalized and at risk of restraint, of being harassed and bullied, of the fact that we have legislation, but it's hard to enforce, and it doesn't provide adequate protection for people. There's the situation of the fact that it's very difficult to have autonomy. Discrimination is a reality for people who are disabled, particularly of color. But if you're a parent, the fact that your disability can be used against you in the absence of neglect or abuse is very sobering. So if you have a partner and you split up, if your partner is able and you are not, you might be at risk of not having custody of your child simply because we live in an ableist society. And I apologize for the typo, it should be an N here, but termination of rights in 35 states, disability is grounds for that. Again, in some of these states and provinces, this is without neglect or abuse. Then there's the school to prison pipeline factor of things, and the fact that when you look at the juvenile justice system, or injustice system, I should say, or the criminal system, when you look at the amount of untreated, unaddressed, inadequately controlled mental health diagnoses that people face there. And we look at the fact that even the terminology that people use, for Americans suffers from a mental disorder, as opposed to is diagnosed with or has. And then this isn't just, again, this is not just US centric, because because we live in a global society where people live and are from all types of many different places. And it's beyond just race and disability. It also, gender plays a role, sexual orientation plays a role, culture plays a role, and all of the, these things. And they're, on almost every metric that you look at, whether we're talking about substance use, whether we're talking about depression screening, people who are BIPOC, people who are queer, people who are disabled, we tend to have more, suboptimal outcomes than our peers. We tend to have a lower quality of life. We tend to live in persistent poverty. We tend to have less likely to have home ownership or educational attainment. And all of these things are painful and it's difficult. And so you're living your life and you're wanting to be authentic and you're wanting people to understand, okay, we need accommodations. We are all different, but none of us are less. We presume competence of all of us. And so you wonder, how much do you camouflage? And then for those who are not able to, then what? What do you do? How do you keep going and maintain and get what you need, and change things and still survive? And one of the ways that we have to do that is we have to prioritize our mental health. We have to understand, we have to think dialectically. Sometimes more than one thing can be true at once. It can be, a very affirming, and, positive and central part of one's identity to be disabled and to be a person of color, what have you. And it can also be a very difficult one as well. And neither one of those things has to cancel out the other. And we can care about our communities, we can care about our people, and still understand the need for self-care, to care for ourselves, or to have boundaries and to have limits. And so I've been really, moved in recent years by public figures who've been, particularly those of color. This is just the actress, or all of these people who have been sharing openly about, some of whom are deceased, like Frida Kahlo, some of whom are not, sharing about their, psychiatric disability or mental health or neurological differences in one way or another, and kind of putting a face on it to, so that people know that they're not. It's not just them. It's lots of people. And this is something that since my youth, I've, had various, varying, circumstances with, mental health and suicidal ideation and so forth. And a lot of this is what encouraged me to go into education, because I wanted youth to have a better circumstance than I did. So some of the things that I do is I try to accommodate myself. So this is a picture of my backpack, my purse. I carry things with me that I need. If I can't find speech, then I've got, badges. I've got my pronoun badges. I've got stimming things available, because you just never know when you're somewhere and some kind of noise or circumstance could trigger you or harm you. I also lean into the things that I like very much. I'm into, I love Steven Universe, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super. I love the Marvel, cinematic universe and things like that. Certain books, I love the Expanse series and the Overeating Chronicles. And so I read these things and I watch these things, and I lean into these things that I enjoy as a form of self-care and emotional regulation. Community is also important. And so people are, there's a project, a wonderful project on this website, neurodiverse.com, of people showing their faces and, of people of color, depicting who they are, living their lives with, their various different disabilities, quote unquote, invisible disabilities, many of which are, related to mental health. And so I think it's important. Everyone doesn't have to, you don't have to be the represent, be the ambassador or share. You don't have to be a self-narrating Zoom exhibit to still be able to share your own personal experiences as well as that of others and to change. And so on my website, which is MorénikeGiwa.com, I have a resources page, including some things specific to mental health. So this is just some links about cross-cultural mental health. But I just want to encourage all of you to take care of yourselves. And so whether it is a situation like, we're going to make mistakes. This mistake may not be as big as jumping on a stage and slapping somebody in front of the entire world. It might not be that, but it might be something that you feel is, that you're concerned about, or you feel like isn't representative of who you are or the person that you want to be. And despite that, give yourself understand that the next day, today is another day, and give yourself permission to be who you are. Today I'm speaking to you all. It's been kind of a challenging day health-wise. As I mentioned, I couldn't find my scarf, and like I told you all, I have alopecia. This is a wig. And I need them. I often wear them when I have to give speaking engagements, when I have my camera on, but it's hot, so I'm taking it off. And so I just want to encourage you to be you, to be who you are, to love yourself, and to understand that there's only one you. Thank you.
Wow. So much. Morénike, I'm just so blown away by, first of all, everything you shared tonight, obviously, but everything, who you are as a person and what you represent in terms of certainly all of your professional work, but just that message that you just ended off with, right? About being authentic and being you. And we'll talk about, be beautiful. And you are that be beautiful person. You are that person that we all look to within the community of autistic and otherwise neurodivergent folks. But I think, globally, what you're doing, it's like every time I turn around, there's something new that Morénike is trying to make change and and spread love, but also, you know, it's not, we do things in gentle relationship building ways, but there's also the time for really taking agency and really pushing the envelope and navigating pathways like you have, you know, been in political circles and community circles and cross-cultural circles. And I think you represent so much here, and that's why I just am so humbled and honored to have been able to connect with you back in the fall when we did. For me, it was a pivotal moment, and we did have such a wonderful conversation. And I was, it was, I think, in many ways, life-changing for me, and I hope it is for others who get to learn from you and connect with you, because you are that person who went out there and started normalizing stimming. You are that person who has put yourself out there in so many ways, and just so humbled and honored to be in this space with you. And thank you for being here. Really so grateful.
And you all, I know that we went a little bit over, so I apologize. I thank you for those of you who were able to stay on. I really greatly appreciate all of you. And just, again, this summit in general, we just hope that we can kind of keep this momentum going for ourselves, for our community.
Absolutely. And I know that earlier when we spoke, you were saying that you were okay to take some questions. I know we've got a few friends here helping to field both in our Zoom chat, but also in our live stream chat. And I know, Maddie, you're still there, I believe. And Natasha is there. Yep, excellent. Thank you. And Sophia is there. And I just want to do a quick shout out to Almazar and Sophia for helping to co-host this in terms of the tech as well. It's been a blitz of just nonstop, but it's autistic collaboration at its finest, right? It really has been. Yes, certainly lots of work went into it ahead of time, but it's amazing to see the organic things that are happening as we're connecting and thinking, oh, maybe we should live stream this differently, or, you know, anyway, I don't want to take up any time. But I wonder, Maddie, would you and maybe Sophia, if you're there, I just want to make sure I'm not interrupting what Sophia's doing, because she might have bedtime routines or etc. Would you like to kind of facilitate the questions? Is that okay? Okay, all right.
Yes, yeah, sure. Well, Sophia's back as well. Yeah, I just want to say to Morénike, thank you so much for not just the presentation, but all you are and do and represent, and this learning opportunity. I'm eternally grateful, as I'm sure everyone else in this room is and should be. Yes, in terms of questions to everybody in the Zoom call, if you'd like to put them in the chat, we will pass them over. Just to start off, really, Morénike, the personal question about, you know, allyship and learning how to take practical steps to give not just tokenistic solidarity to more marginalized communities, but, you know, actual amplifying things and giving that in that solidarity in practical forms, you know, seeing a lot of tokenistic celebrations, but then actually, you know, using this to be something of force. Just any tips and advice for, you know, those well, again, being white cisgender male as myself, and then breaching the you know, connecting the communities in this sense. I'd appreciate that.
Yes, I think that's a great question, because I think that it can be somewhat overwhelming. You know, the person is like, their heart is there, but what do you actually do? And so I think that over time, we kind of, you know, it's almost kind of like circumstances in life shape what we're going to do. But in the beginning, what I would always encourage people is I would always encourage three things. First is to take some time and educate yourself, because I feel like sometimes we can do more harm than good by not knowing enough. So it doesn't mean to be static. It doesn't mean to use it as an excuse, but it means that we all have to learn. It means to dig deep and to dive deep and to find out. Because for as much as we might know, there's a lot out there that we don't know. And so it's it's never, you know, like learning, it helps us to grow, expands our worldview. So, you know, I encourage people to learn more, you know, and kind of and take an earnest effort to learn more, not just surface level, you know, but again, you can't know everything. So maybe sometimes it's going to be, you know, breadth as opposed to depth, but try to learn and also be cognizant of the fact that you're always learning, that you don't know. The second thing I would say is talk the talk, you know, like start doing, you know, start, you know, making those changes, you know what I mean? Like, so start living it. When people are using certain terminology, don't use that terminology, don't use those words, you know, find out what people are saying, amplify the voices of others, be that, you know, be that representation or that voice where they are not because you're the white savior or the stable savior or whatever, but because of the fact that you care and this is real, you know. And so starting with talking, communication, and so forth. And then I'd say, you know, also walk the walk, you know, do the work. And it's hard. And I know a lot of people are scared. And I'm like, you have no, I look at people sometimes and I'm thinking, you have no idea the potential that's in you. You have no idea how, you know, meaningful and, you know, your presence is, and how many people you touch, and, you know, what you're radiating. And you know, it can be, you know, in the small, you know what I mean, in the large, whatever it is. I feel like there's, you know what I mean, that authenticity shines through. I still to this day can remember daycare and elementary school teachers that cared about me. I remember their faces. I remember some of their names. I mean, I'm not young. This is decades ago, but these are people who, the way they treated me, the way they spoke to me, the way they talked to my classmates, the way that stuck with me. That, you know, I still think about a college professor that made science come alive for me again after others had made it boring. And, you know, I just think about one speaking engagement that I went to, and there was a mother there with her little girl. And she said, my little girl wants to shake your hand. She's never seen another Black autistic woman before. And I just wanted to cry. And the little girl was looking at me with her eyes wide, and I just knelt down and I talked to her, and I stemmed a little, and she was stemming too, you know. And it was just like all of these things, you know, like I feel like these what look like small things are so not small. They have such an exponential ripple effect. And so I feel like people have no idea. It doesn't have to be your lived experience for you to go out there and make change. No movement has ever survived without the work of the people in the trenches and then the allies around them. You know, together we're stronger.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Really appreciated that connection and building the bridges, but having that authenticity. And it's something we need more of to, you know, stand out there against the divide and these divisions to show unity. So I appreciate that a lot. I'd like to read out a question from Laura, who was asked, I'd love to ask the following question. It appears the powers that be are hell-bent on dividing groups of people, setting up a climate of apparent scarcity, and getting people to fight others for perceived crumbs. As an anti-racist activist, I often find myself feeling angry and alienated from others. Yeah. How do we stop the division and unite with each other against the real, quote, enemy? That was from Laura. Thank you, Laura.
That's so deep. I think that can be a whole presentation in itself, because it is true. This, creation of this, urgency and this false scarcity and this and pitting people against one another, so that our energies are divided and that there's little trust. And I think a lot of it is because of the fact that there's fear in the solidarity that we can all have if we unite with one another. And so it's very challenging. And I think that some of it's very difficult. Some of what can help, I think, is just really just to kind of slow down and take things piece by piece. Because I think that when we sit and we dissect things, often you can kind of find both the problematic core, kind of where things might have gone wrong or the misinterpretation was, but then also you can find the common ground as well. And so I think that some of what we need to do is, just try to, to be strategic and intentional in terms of what we're allowing to be in our brains and who we're allowing to pour into us and what we refute. And I think we also need to try at times to really learn to choose our battles carefully, because I think we exhaust our energy on, it isn't that it isn't relevant or that it isn't true, but is it the best use of our energy, of our time? And sometimes I think we need to reserve, skip some of the battles so that we can have what was necessary to win the war. And I think we need to also just kind of model that for people. Like, when people try to play those games or do whatever, I think that, hopefully our actions will speak more boldly than their lies. But it is very true. It's a successful game, that's been happening since, as long as humans have existed. And I hate that we keep falling into that trap and keep doing that to one another, but I do have hope. I have faith that we can, in small doses kind of start to break the system and kind of break away.
Oh, thank you so much.
CJ.
Oh, fantastic. The answers with that and the authenticity shining through. Really feeling that it's about, challenging the ego as well and unconscious biases and just continuing to have these conversations and rehumanizing people, as I say, moving away from the dehumanization and that what can unite us, yet taking, action of what really are oppressive structures is key. I'd just like to read something out, a comment from Callum Brazo, a really interesting one, about the quote fiery Latina stereotype / remnant of truth. Perhaps as I don't know any Latina women, but that must be hard expressing your emotions, perhaps in line an ADHD profile, because people will just put it down to quote fieriness. Lots to think about. And yeah, I was thinking about this also, and like tone policing of different things as well, and just your thoughts on that. I think it's an interesting point by Colin.
It is. It's so interesting because I think about, I was telling my children and they were looking at me like I was lying. I was like, look it up, I'm telling the truth. I told them, I said, when I was growing up, you call somebody queer, they're fighting you. I said, it wasn't like now where we reclaimed that term. I said, and they were like, oh, really? Like, it's just so odd to them, for that to be, they still don't understand, it doesn't make any sense. And so I think that there's a, that's actually the reason I put that one, image on there where she was basically pushing back at the fiery Latina, thing, because a person can be demure, they can be fiery, it can be a combination of both, and or none of the above. And I think that, as you mentioned, the tone policing, people are saying, oh, you all are out of control, oh, you all are too emotional, and then they're doing things that are, fueling eugenics and discrimination, and we're supposed to be calm and non-emotional and objective about that. Like how, and so it's just really, it's problematic. And so, and I think it also causes people to kind of hide aspects of who they are. I think about how I have developed a lot of internal stems because of growing up, the adults and teachers said, stop moving, stop doing this, stop doing that, stop doing that. And so I didn't stop studying, I just hid it. And so I just think about how much of that, again, with ADHD, with dyslexia, with giftedness, with intellectual disability, autism, with whatever, a different, all of the different, flavors of humanity, living as we are can be hard. I think about the fact that I tell I try to tell people that stop saying that your son is too young to be gaming or this is too old. This thing is not, everyone wants to ascribe things to a particular timetable, and it shames people, and it keeps us from being who we are. And the thing that's very interesting is that a lot of the traits that you see in neurodivergence, when they exist in the general population, they're revered. They're seen as experts, they're seen as dedicated, they're seen as unique. But the same things are pathologized in us. And so, ultimately, it doesn't benefit anyone. What society has always gained from having those out-of-the-box thinkers. We've always been the ones to kind of do things differently and make things happen and recognize those patterns. And so I agree. I think that's a really unique, it's something that I had to think about as being a person, being a non-binary Black woman, and thinking, okay, so if I'm, this is wrong, but if I call this out, is it just that angry Black woman thing? Is it the attitude? Can't I just be passionate about this because I am? Because I'm just really passionate. I think if I was, pale, I'd be just as touching it. I think I'm just me. But I do understand. And I think it's frustrating. And I think that there's a lot of erasure. And I've noticed it. And it goes, and I think when talking about like the hidden aspect of disability, even though it's truly not that hidden, I think about my white colleagues who are marginalized, but that's erased by society as far as they're concerned. If you're not visibly, racially, or physically disabled, you need to fall in line. And that's completely negating people's needs, people's uniqueness. And it's putting people, in a tiny little box that doesn't fit most of us.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Morénike. So many thoughts. Sophia wants to. Hey, Sophia, come in. Yeah.
Thank you. Got a question.
Sure.
What message do you have for fellow autistics in April? Hopes, advice, and strategies without getting in trouble by the police, I would have to say. It's a wee bit extra. You know what I mean, man. You know what I mean, right?
I love our people. We don't mess around. We just say what we need to say. And so, it's interesting. Like this year is the first year in many years that I actually this is, I don't know, I will see if this advice works because it's the first time I'm doing this. But for the Disability Day of Mourning in March, I usually commemorate it. And this year, I kind of decided to kind of keep away, and there's nothing wrong with, being in community, but it was something I decided to kind of be at home and contemplate and maybe, put something out and address it later. It was just for me what I needed to do because it was just it is important to honor the lives that have been lost and to speak out against suicide and ableism, but it got very heavy. And so it's some years I've been like, I'm gonna push for it, I'm gonna reclaim April, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And then other times it's been like, let me hang back, let me rest. Because April is supposed to be for us, but it's been co-opted, it's for all of them. So, yes, Disability Day of Mourning, yes, CJ. And so I think that this year, what I'm going to do is for April is I'm going to try to, so my advice is, again, I don't know if it works, but what I'm going to try to do, and I suggest that people try to do is I'm going to take it day by day, because often I'm looking at the whole month of April and is it a big stressor, or am I going to keep myself busy to not be stressed, or what am I going to do? And I think that feels very exhausting to me right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each day at a time, and I'm going to try to affirm myself, and my children, as an autistic person in my community, try to think of something positive, try to review something, that makes me feel, kind of contemplate things that are positive. And then if I have to go out there and do my battle, whatever, I'll do it. But I'm just going to try to take each day at a time instead of looking at April as this 30-day month of hell and stress of puzzle pieces and stigmatizing language and functioning labels. I'm going to look at it as this is April 1st, this is April 2nd, this is April 3rd, and I'm just going to, one day at a time, walk it in. I'm hoping by doing so, I can, kind of like be a little bit more mindful of what's happening and not lose myself in the shuffle of what people think autism is or is not. And I'm going to actively avoid some things very much. Oh, I agree, CJ. I identify as tired. Yes, it can be very tiresome in April. And so I'm going to kind of give myself, I'm going to take it like self-care time. And so, and I hope that it works. We will see. It's a different approach in order to take it. I've always tried to be prepared for it and not just kind of go into it, but I'm just going to kind of do it spontaneously.
Thank you so much. And how about, okay, so one of my local schools here has this year decided to publicly say, well, we're going to celebrate Autism Acceptance Week. But they probably won't know from outside in whose voices to amplify, and because naturally they'll go for the big charities, right? The people who speak the loudest are the ones who get the more platforms, whether they're saying the right things or wrong, right? That's the way it is. Unfortunately, we do have non-autistic charities that peddle their own agenda basically, and then our public sector, private sector, third sector, they follow these people because just so they've got a big following, they've got more money and more presence online. What kind of things should, when we're teaching our students, because I'm a teacher, so I'm going to say this, right? So what do we look out for as educators who are neurotypical, full neurotypical educators and administrators? What should we look out for, and who shall we, I don't know, step one to go forward with this whole thing, that they want to educate their pupils?
So I found that it can be helpful to kind of provide, like kind of like lists or resources. And so one that I give a lot to people is non-autism.com from the Autism Book Club. There's a book list for youth. There's one for adults. There's one for parents. So I create. I try to create things that are palatable, because you're right. They're thinking big charity. This has got to be the way. This is how it works. These people know what they're doing, or this, their intention is, they mean well, but really, I feel like the most change. I think about that phrase that says, think globally, act locally, and I think there's so much. So I would encourage people to, instead of trying to go for the big thing, what is something in your community or in your area or in your, that you could really make an impact? Like what is something that you can do or that can be done, that can really make a tangible difference, that can really be meaningful and can be sustained. And I feel like that's something that people don't do often, unfortunately. And so why, if you can take this whatever it is, this amount of energy and this time, and you can pour it somewhere, like I try to tell people, like, okay, well, these are some resources you could help right now. Like, I tell people, for example, is there a place where you can give public comment to your school district or to a government? I was doing a speaking engagement yesterday, and I was at a company, and I was telling them to please go to the IACC website to say, they entered, since they were in the United States, and to, although you can comment from elsewhere, and to make commentary about needs that you see. I was telling people about how there are programs there, educational programs, training programs that need assistance. How there's the Autistic People of Color Fund, program that's fiscally sponsored by AWN that provides micro grants to autistic people of color in need, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, of every, and there's other programs like the Citizen Directed Supports Fund that does so for disabled people, not necessarily disabled people of color, but disabled people, regardless of race. So like trying to find practical resources, I think, is very helpful. If people are able to do that, it's hard, but I think that, is there a school, or is there an art program? Is there something that you can focus on? Is there a local, leader or advocate that you can come and bring to share, or, their experiences? And is there a scholarship that you could raise money for and to help, rather than just then your money going to be another little zero on the end of this big organization that doesn't even know you exist. What can you do to help? And then I see here, there's also surveys, like, for example, the autistic.weird.com autism survey. And then there's been a lot of research that's been coming out from the voices of our community. And so that's another thing I encourage them to do. So the right terminology, the right resources to make it palatable. I think about how people do, like there'll be stories about someone who just decided to start doing cleanup in their neighborhood, in their area, and then how it starts to spread and people do more of it, because people will get overwhelmed and think the problem is too big. But if we all take small steps toward fixing these bigger problems, we would see so much of a greater outcome.
Can I ask you to repeat, because your volumes went up and down on that bit when you said think globally? I didn't quite catch that quote.
Globally, act locally. I'll type it too. And I'm not sure which order it is. I think it's, I may be saying it wrong, but it's something to the effect.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I can't
hand up.
It's a quote from someone, but it's one that I really like, because I think that is true when you think of
that's being a global citizen, right? Basically, yes, be a global citizen, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yep. Karen?
Hi. Sorry, I keep having to move because my internet is so funny. So I'm I'm trying to find a Wi-Fi signal that'll work right now. Been having tech issues all day. So A question that I have for you, Morénike, is if you think about when you were little and what you're, you are one of the editors of the wonderful compilation of authentic stories of real experiences from the autistic community, and Sincerely Your Autistic Child. And as you know, I'm a real fan of that book and that compilation. We've used it in my online campus with educators, new teachers, experienced teachers, as well as we've launched it in a Twitter space where we did the first one the other night. And I read your poem, because to me it was one that just encapsulates so much, and that was our kickoff. If you had a message for, and I'm not saying necessarily your parents at home, because it's not about faulting anybody for what people didn't know, right? We do the best we can. That's our message as educators and as autistics, is that our families are grown-ups at home. They do the best they can with the information that they have. But what would be a message that you might want to convey to families, carers of children who are autistic, or possibly autistic, or otherwise neurodivergent, particularly those within the Black community or in our Black, Indigenous, people of color community, who have these additional, like when we think of intersectionality, that's the whole purpose of us being here, is the complexities that society is, further marginalizing multiple populations within the autistic community, obviously globally in the larger community. But this is such a challenge because there's such stigma and such it's just mind-boggling as a family to try and navigate that. And what thoughts do you have on that? It's not really a question. It's just I want, think of what are your thoughts there?
I think it's really complex, as you mentioned, because I think it's, there's so many different layers, and, there can be a learning curve, and, I think it's interesting because, one thing I've started to do is kind of look back. I've started to have this, I don't know, kind of almost like an anthropological little experiment in that, I think I pronounced that wrong. Sorry, but whatever. It doesn't sound right in my head. But to where I'm looking at elements of society, and I'm looking at the kind of in what ways have people leaned in or self-accommodated, or maybe collectively accommodated certain aspects of who we are. And what made me start thinking about this was a few years ago. I remember reading an article where someone said, "I don't understand how all these people are saying that they're Black, but they're not. They're clearly not Black." I'm thinking, what do you mean they're clearly not Black? They're like what they're like. I'm thinking, people come in lots of different shades, they're not all one color. And so I started realizing, wow, the nuances of the kind of the differences of humans isn't something that's, for some people, it really is very binary. You're this or you're that. And that's not the way reality is. And so I started thinking, well, because of the, range in phenotype, in certain communities, it's, it isn't atypical to see someone look this way and then look this way and be relatives. And so I started thinking about the fact that what other aspects are kind of already built in or kind of accommodated or in culture, and I started thinking about how some of the movements, the music or the food or the practices or customs of certain groups, about how sometimes it incorporates, it builds in sensory input or what have you. And so I think about how some people may not be, recognized or even recognize themselves, and how much of it is because the environment, whether one's home or culture or community, has certain things that allow for you to be who you are, where that's, what would be annoying stemming somewhere else is a perfect basketball shot, or is a spelling, perfect recitation of a spelling bee, or what have you, or as you braiding or curling hair and doing hair because now you can think you do with your hands, or what are these different things? What in the food preparations, they're already sensory, enough sensory input for you that where you don't need to, there's just so many different things. And so I just think that I think we need to, I really wish that and hope that people will take a look back, because I've started to realize how many of the people that I grew up reading about or admiring how many of them live at the intersection of race and disability, and sometimes often gender and or sexuality. And it was not a factor that was, really, a big deal to people or worth sharing. But knowing what I know now and how things, feed into each other, it's really, like when I think about, well, if I'd known X person was disabled or X person was of this culture or this, when I read and I start seeing these things and these patterns, it really just kind of really, I don't know, it's really, really insightful for me. And so I think that if people can stop, because life is so busy, and just be a little bit more objective. I think parents are always go, go, go. And you're thinking of safety, you're thinking about all of the things you need to prepare your child for, you're thinking about circumstances and all of these things. I think sometimes, and that's all necessary, but I think if you can just sometimes just stop and appreciate what is, and recognize and, be able to describe what is, it will be easier for us to kind of build that haven within our home setting. And sometimes if you can have that home base is safe, even when the rest of the world is draining, and stigmatizing, you can still find like a sense of peace.
Thank you so much for that. There really are so many layers, right? And I think that's why, as we've had a number of spaces where it'll be educators connecting to think about next steps for educators, and spaces where it's parents and guardians, moving from parents or guardians of autism parents, moving towards the idea of parents, guardians of autistics. Yes. and embracing. And certainly when we navigate, I think of our new friend Baljit, who is the founder of Six for Autism. And he's local to us. And again, this is the beauty of the internet, right? Because we've found each other. And, Baljit is a parent. He does not identify as neurodivergent. He's introduced himself as the parent of a child who is autistic. So I know that is public knowledge. For him and the organization Six for Autism, I know there are people in many communities who really want to advocate for their children in ways that are best for their child, but while navigating pressures, not only of systems, but also of culture, faith, gender differences, gender identity differences, like all of these pressures and stigmas. And as somebody who has co-founded and done so much, and founded and written and you name it. Do you have any thoughts for someone like Baljit, who is trying to do the right thing, but with all these constraints upon him in terms of the pressures?
From the 9 Twitter feed I discovered it, I was happy to follow. I was like, oh my gosh, I was so happy to see that, and grateful, and so I think that what I would encourage, I would say to take things, like keep at it, but take it slow, and keep it at a pace that's manageable, because I think I know that in the beginning, I saw so much that needed to be done, and I jumped in and I threw myself into a lot of things, and I, ended up kind of stretching myself thin and burning out. And I feel like there's so many people who are doing such important work, and you know what I mean. I think about the fact that if you want something you don't really care about that much, you'll go to the dollar store, or you go to the Walmart, or Target. But if you want something quality, you usually go to a specialist for that, some place that specializes in something. And so, I feel like, it's rare to have, there's people who want to help, like you mentioned, but in terms of to this degree and with this level of openness, it's not really something that's there. So this really is paving a road. And I would say, find your niche, and that's one, and build it and build it and build it well. And lay that foundation. Surround yourself with people who are caring. They may not know that much, but you want good people and good energy around you. You do want to get, have people to inform us. We want people to educate us and so forth, or and educate ourselves with people who we can learn from and who, we can, pattern ourselves after. But we also want people who just have our back. and also people who will tell us the truth and call us to the carpet when we're not correct. That can be worth so much, that, can be so important. Is just that support system, those people who are willing to kind of pick up the load for you and kind of encourage you when you're down and remind you of what you're doing while you're doing what you're doing, and trying to find a way, like if you could be passionate about 25 things, but maybe pick 5 and focus on those 5 and become a master of those 5, or and so and learn what other people are doing so that you can, we have such a community of people doing so many things, so we don't have to be a generalist, when we can have specialists. Thank you, Laura. Yes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And again, those partnerships and collaborations, right? And I know you've worked so closely with so many organizations, and when I think of Neuroclastic, and when I think of all of the great connections that you've made, I like to use the word cross-pollinate. We're constantly, right, cross-pollinate, because that's the brilliance of a summit like this. We want it to be, yes, certainly organized and ready to go, but also organic and continues to evolve through the week. And so we're making a variety of connections with multiple people, but these are ideas that we need to be hearing, we need to be pushing forward, we need to be sharing. And I thank you so much for those ideas, because I know that there are many out there who want to do right. They just don't know where to start, right? Maddie or Sophia, I know you're fielding questions. Are there any others? And I want to just be cognizant of the time, because we thank you for being here with us until it is our time, just after 7:30. So we're just over an hour and a half from the beginning of when we started. I know we had a few minutes delay because of earlier tech issues today, but any last couple questions, perhaps? Is that okay with you, Morénike?
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go first. Thanks very much for the talk and just listening to everything. I guess maybe asking about your thoughts on applied behavioural analysis, ABA, and kind of autistic, how that's regimented, in whichever way you'd like to discuss that, if that's okay.
Yes. So it's interesting, because I've made myself a lot of enemies lately, because my views have evolved, but then when I still feel like, most, when we look at our neurologies, our neurominorities, so they're brain-based differences, they're neurological disabilities, they're not, or conditions of well-being, they're not behaviorally based. And so I feel like anything that's, looking at something that's external, is always going to be missing. Even if you get elements of something, of what is happening, there's never going to get the full picture. It's always going to be incomplete. And so I feel like anything that's compliance based, anything that's coercive, even if it works, is unethical. And so I give the example of how, in the United States during slavery, economically slavery was an amazing system. If it's all about effectiveness, if you're measuring just by that, then people should be enslaved right now. But in terms of the bigger picture, the human rights factor and all those other things, it's inhumane. There's some things, there's no price that's worth that. And so I think that just because you can train someone to mimic or behave a certain way, they can seem to gain some skills, is it worth the internal cost? And I feel that I know there are people who are trying to make reform from within, with ABA. They're trying to infuse different practices. They're trying to take something problematic and they're trying to take the perspectives and the criticism and feedback of the community and make changes, and I hope they will be successful. I think there's a lot of great people with who are ambitious, but I think it's very difficult when you look at the basis of the field and and a lot of the practices and the trauma that's been that has occurred. At the same time, I know that for some people there isn't much else in their community, and so and I know that there's complexities, such as if you don't, are you going to be accused of medical neglect if you don't do this? Or is this the only thing that's in your area and you don't have resources? We're in a rural area, or sometimes people don't really know what else they can do, or don't feel like they have many resources. So I feel like no matter what a person is using, whatever resources a person is utilizing, be very engaged, make sure it's very client-centered, ask a lot of questions, observe, make changes. No one should hand you anything that's template and cookie cutter. And I think people should think things through about what are you actually hoping to gain, and what is the long term, what is the long term benefit of whatever that you're doing. If people can use other resources, I encourage them to. I would say, if you can stay away from ABA, stay away. I'm just being honest. I feel like it's not, overall, it's not in our best interest. I feel like there is a reason why there's such a high rate of suicidal ideation and physical and sexual abuse in our communities. If we're taught that if you perform a certain way, if you answer a certain way, you move a certain way, that people will like you, or you will not bother people, or you will be acceptable, how does that not translate into the future, into toxic friendships, into business relationships that are unhealthy, into romantic relationships where you're being taken advantage of and you're not even aware of it? How does that not teach you to doubt yourself and to suppress your own needs and to not feel comfortable being who you truly are, but instead to give the expected answer? How does that encourage authenticity and true vulnerability? It doesn't. It teaches you how to shame. I mean, it teaches you shame, and it teaches you how to be fake. Maybe very effectively fake, but still fake. At the same time, I also know there's some people who go in. We've always had people infiltrate everything. You know what I mean? I know there's autistic people who've intentionally gone into ABA so they can go into a practice and turn things all around and change things up and shape things up. And they may bill it as ABA, but the practices that they're doing are more developmentally appropriate, more naturalistic, and they're really just kind of thumbing their nose at the system to be able to help autistic children. So I know that it's complicated. I do think that some of the natural developmental behavioral interventions are an improvement upon like the discrete child training and some of the things, but I also think about the fact that my two autistic children, before my own diagnosis, when I first came in, and the scare tactics, the ADA right now, or your child's life is going to be destroyed, and so forth, and putting one child in, and then later learning more, and not putting the other. And I look at the two of them who are very close in age, and I see one that's still struggling with tremendous anxiety and a lot of self-doubt and a lot of things, and I see the other that isn't. One can pass, one will never pass. But it's passing the goal, and it isn't. And I see, well, whose quality of life is better? I just feel like there's too many things in this world that are already difficult and challenging and uncertain to introduce another element of potential fear and potential trauma. And if you can find something else that could hopefully maybe be slower, but have a positive impact. Bye, Damon. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. That was so enlightening, and I look a lot into research around ABA and the different practices. So I appreciate that. I believe Sophia might have a question, or I can do a follow-up one. Sophia,
I've seen a few, and so I know that there is a researcher out of the University of Texas in Dallas, Desiree Jones, I think. Hold on, say her name.
One more time.
Sorry, there's a researcher there's a couple of people who've been researching, BIPOC experiences, like neurodivergent experiences. One of them is out of UT Dallas. I think it's Desi or Desiree Jones.
I can't get the names because your audio's not good.
I'll try to email it to Karen, so that you can have, because there's some people who've done some of this work. And I'm sure there are more. I wish I knew of more, but I know of a few, and it might be of interest.
Oh, take your time. You don't have to answer right now. That's okay. I found you now. It's okay.
All right. And so CJ said Grant Bruno is one. Okay. I never seen those. Are awesome.
I was just
I didn't know. Thank you. I say this. I love these types of things. Like you learn so much from people.
It's all right. I was just going to ask, actually, building on that, about the link with high functioning and low functioning. Like, you know, people expected and just interested how, yeah. Yeah.
Hate it. I think it's horrible. What person wants to be called low? You know, that's one thing I can understand. If they, you know, like I think they need to think about, you know, those of us who are neurodivergent, we can often be very low, high, low. I mean, it's like who wants to be low? Why would a person want to be called low? And then how do you determine high? High in reference to what? Low in reference to what? And when? In what circumstances? I just feel like it's so imprecise and inaccurate. And I wish people would just say what they mean. Like, it makes me think, and I use this example quite a bit. I tell people about, like, you know, my family's from West Africa, and I lived in the Midwest part of the United States in my childhood, and in the South and on the West Coast. But there was a saying that in the South that people used to have pretty hair. And pretty hair meant a hair texture that was softer, you know, finer, it was like curlier, but not as thick, not an afro texture. And so I'm thinking, the opposite of pretty is ugly. So if your hair is not like this, your hair is ugly. Because it's not pretty, okay, and ugly. It's like one or the other again. So I was just thinking, why can't you just say curly hair, you know, or soft hair? Why don't you say what you mean? You know, there was also a saying pretty eyes. If a person had hazel or green or brown, or, you know, eyes, anything other than dark brown like mine, they were pretty. So I'm thinking, so are my eyes ugly? I guess they are. Why? You know, like, and so instead of saying, people could just say what they mean. If you want to say this person's minimally speaking, this person's an AAC user, this person has, you know, a full-time aide, or, you know, this person has a lot of, you know, noticeable stereotypy in their movements, or this person, whatever, say what you were trying to say, describe person A, as opposed to saying high and low, because I think that, you know, I think it's Laura, I never say her last name right. I think SONCK, who says that, you know, being high functioning means that your needs are ignored. Being low functioning means that your strengths and your attributes are ignored. You know, and it's very frustrating. And so I think that people shouldn't be described in that way. It tells us nothing about who they are. It's just an arbitrary word. It's not part of the, it's not in the diagnostic criteria. And so I just, you know, it disgusts me when people are like, you know, this person's mildly autistic, this person's high functioning, this person's low functioning. It doesn't tell us anything about the person, and it doesn't, you know, uplift or respect people, you know, and their, you know, and the uniqueness of people.
No, thanks. I just remembered the great Autismatic saying, I think he said he was spicy autistic or something.
Oh, I love that.
Spiciness or somebody, like, we're going to have, like, you know, or profoundly autistic, well, a spicy level, I don't know, fiercely.
Yes,
You know, like, mix it up with the language, you know?
Yeah.
That's
So
wonderful.
I'm going to just end the YouTube live right now, because it's getting on for a long time now.
Let's just say thank you before you go. Those of you that are on YouTube, obviously we've kind of done our thank you to Morénike, but just sincerest gratitude for sharing in this space. And yeah, this is the formal goodbye. And we're really, Sophia, you're too funny, you and your octopus. But we're just so pleased that you could be with us. So thank you again. And we did it.